The age of VR is upon us because the Oculus Rift was just released this week. Yes, everyone now has an Oculus Rift. Well, no, a few people have one, and the rest just have to keep waiting until they build more of them because, well, a lot of people wanted it. Even though it costs about as much as I make in, you see, no, not gonna say it. It's just gonna be depressing if I say it. The important bit is that VR is here, and yet some games seem to have been made with the idea that VR was already here years and decades ago. And these are the top 7 games that need to be remade for VR. Games that were just right for VR even though there was no VR back then. Games that were so well adapted to the way in which VR is actually used now that you can't help but wonder why are they not yet announced as VR games in remade versions, remastered ones even. Ones that will work on the Rift, on the Vive, on the whatever other things are gonna be coming out soon that finally allow you to play these games the way they were meant to be played. That being said, number 7, Virtua Cop and House of the Dead. Well, more to the point, just about every one of those light gun games that were actually good. The ones where you stand still and the game moves for you because they solve a really important issue that VR has, namely, how do you move? The Oculus Rift doesn't have a way for you to control the game in VR yet. Oh sure, it ships with an Xbox gamepad, but frankly, it shouldn't. It's not that good for VR. What it could do is maybe use those sensors and stuff to track your hand as you move it in front of you like a gun and just shoot the bad guys as they come up, the zombies, and then moves you forward to the next location. And you know, frankly, Virtua Cop, or at least Virtua Cop 2, is a better shooter than some shooters I've actually played recently, well, in the past few years that weren't on rails. It had better pacing, a higher difficulty level, more choices. Yes, not kidding. The game where you at sometimes could decide, hey, I'm gonna go left, or I'm gonna go right, and I'm gonna end up in the same place. Had more choices than something like, I don't know, the last few Medal of Honor games, anything made in single-player Call of Duty, in essence, most of the first-person shooter genre. They would be great for VR. You can even leave those old graphics because, hey, they'll run at just about any resolution now, and very good frame rate, though you would probably have to tweak it a bit so it will run in better resolutions because Virtua Cop sort of, I don't think it went over 640 by 480. But with that settled, they would be good games for VR. They would be right games for VR again because they require no motion from the player apart from actually aiming and shooting. It would be the simplest thing to implement, hopefully. Number 6, Chivalry. Well, just about any first-person medieval combat game could actually fit this role, but Chivalry did it really well. Well, actually, Mountain Blade also did it well, but this one did it a little bit better because you could duck under someone else's sword. Just imagine it, Chivalry redone with VR. A VR where you'd have a controller in your hand, sort of like the ones that the Vive has, which you could use as an emulated sword, a battle axe, or, because there's 2 of them, a bow. It would be amazing. You'd actually have to swing and chop and aim and actually try to hit someone by hitting them directly. Oh sure, there wouldn't be that much of a feedback because making a controller vibrate wouldn't be the same as just feeling your sword get stuck in someone else's corpse. But that's another matter. The important thing is that you could make a really good first-person medieval combat game with the Oculus Rift or the Vive, and Chivalry is already a good one. By combining the 2, you could make something great. Or you could just hope the Deliverance Kingdom Come has proper VR support. Now, I would have said that maybe instead of a medieval melee combat game, you could have, I don't know, a Jedi combat game in it, but basically Disney doesn't care, Activision doesn't care, Electronic Arts doesn't care, so there's no way you're gonna see Jedi Academy remade in VR, basically. There's no hope. That's why it's not on the list. These people have gold in their hands, and they wipe their asses with it. Number 5, Magic Carpet. Back in the old day, Bullfrog made a really interesting game. A game like, well, I'd say no other. Though it was a bit like Populous, a first-person Populous, if you will, but with an action inclination. You played as the apprentice of a wizard that basically shattered the world, whose job was to put it all back together again. And you did that by flying around in a magic carpet and throwing fireballs at dragons. Also, you would sometimes build a city and then kill dragons and other things to collect the mana from their corpses and restore the world. All this from a first-person perspective. You would fly around the world, fly around cities, fly around dragons and kill them. It was amazing, astonishing. You just can't understand how Peter Molyneux made this and then made that thing with the cube. This game was meant for VR. This game was created for it. And now the technology finally allows us to bring it to VR. And we should, because it would be astonishing. Just imagine flying on a magic carpet through the world, through a city, through a dragon's esophagus. It would be an experience like you've never seen before in VR. Unless, I don't know, Disney probably slaps a copyright on it because, hey, magic carpet, we invented that. Sure you did, Disney. Sure you did. Number 4, Myst. Well, maybe not Myst itself, but games like Myst, which is actually kind of incorrect because it would be more precisely games like The Seventh Guest. Those adventure games that you experienced in first person, where you could walk around a very interesting place. It was sometimes dead and lifeless like Myst, and sometimes actually interesting like The Seventh Guest. Games where you had puzzles which you had to solve in first person. Puzzles that were very varied at the time, a lot better than what we have now. Puzzles that they could change a bit for the VR version so it wouldn't be the exact same game, so people that played play them could enjoy them again without just solving everything from memory, because those games had puzzles that you kind of remember them after a while because they were, well, some of them were a bit sadistically made by people that wanted you to suffer in the torments of hell. And in a way, we're actually getting that. Well, not the torments of hell bit, but the developers of Myst, Cyan Worlds, are making a game called Abduction, which is basically Myst again, but with VR support. Well, it will have VR support later on. So this idea has merit, or it will have if people buy it, and it's gonna be successful. Number 3, Arx Fatalis. This game started out as a simple homage, a sequel in all but name, a spiritual successor to the Ultima Underworld series, and well, in some aspects, it outdid it. It is a phenomenal game which is basically made for VR. I mean, just imagine what it would be in VR. First of all, it's a first-person experience where you could see your legs. Yes, even if the game wasn't made in VR back in the day, you could still see your legs. You can't do that in a lot of games now, even with VR. This game took immersion to a whole new level. Oh sure, it may be small by today's standards, but back then, man, that little level where the humans lived felt better, more like a real place than most of Skyrim. People reacted to you. People lived there. They were doing their jobs. They were baking. And you could bake. You can make pies. You can make poison pies. But most of all, the way it handled spells and combat is just well suited for VR. You could make the sword move the way your controller moves. You know, give it that medieval combat treatment like I said you should do to Chivalry in VR. But also it had spells which you had to cast by manually drawing the runes in the air. Sure, it may not have been the fastest way possible, but it was interesting. It was appealing. It made you feel like you were actually in that world doing that instead of, I don't know, selecting the spell from a list and just going with it. This game with VR would have a lot of potential. I really hope that at least Arcane does something in VR because they are very, very good at making this kind of game. Number 2, System Shock. I'm especially talking about the first one, which is kind of being remade right now, with a new engine, with new technology, which supports VR, so I'm just saying that game was made for it. It has VR sections in it where you go into the computer and fight it in 3D wireframe mesh space. It's amazing. Doing that in VR would be amazing. Also, it was one of those first-person total immersion games that were a bit kind of ignored because Doom was big at the time. Also, by coincidence, System Shock 3 is also in the works right now, and it will kind of, yeah, it will support VR. So at least some System Shock is being made with VR, though not necessarily the first one which could really use it to enhance the experience to make it better. Number 1, and the game that really needs to be remade for VR is Black and White. Just think about it. In this game, you're playing from the point of view of a god. All you see of yourself is one hand. A hand which you use to manipulate and to move around the environment. You actually grab hold of the ground and move forward. How amazing is that? In VR, unless you have a Vive and endless moving space, that's how you'll move. You extend your arm, you grab hold, drag back, and bam, you're moving in VR by grabbing onto the ground. Every interaction is made with that hand, grabbing things, throwing rocks at people, throwing people at people, petting your giant cow, giving rocks to your giant cow to throw at people, giving people to your giant cow and see if it eats them or, I don't know, kisses them and heals them and doesn't behave like an evil spawn of Satan like you do. And also the spells, it has that great system of spells where you actually draw each spell. It's more refined than the rune system in Arx Fatalis because there's no formula, just each spell is unique. Each one has a certain shape, one that you draw with your hand in VR. It would be amazing. It would be an experience that will define VR, that will redefine the way you interact with games. And again, it's something that was made by Peter Molyneux a long time ago. Yes, Peter Molyneux basically made VR games before VR was a thing. And now he makes excuses mostly, which is such a shame. Well, that's it for the top 7 games that need to be remade in VR. I'd like to give a few special mentions to the Thief series, and I would say some space combat games like Elite and the X games, but well, they're sort of already in VR because we have Elite Dangerous, and Star Citizen is gonna come out soon too with VR. But most of all, I'd like to not give a special mention, like as in, do not remake this game in VR to Descent, because that's gonna be, for the most part, a game where just vomit non-stop.
If you enjoyed this show, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Or, if you thought it was horrible, then share it with your enemies and make them suffer. We shall be your weapon of vengeance. But if you liked what you saw, you could, I don't know, maybe donate, because basically YouTube is horrible at revenue, by using the link in the description, or just buy my book. It's a fantasy book about, well, a lot of stuff. I guarantee it won't suck, and if it does suck, you can find me here and complain about it.